and with the hope that through that exercising of free will that they would choose the Creator.
You only get one question.
Right. But yes, and so as a consequence of executing that free will, human beings can do harm to one another. They don't have to obey. They don't have to obey the law that's written on their heart or the law that's provided to them through revelation, through Scripture. They have the freedom to go against that, and as a consequence, people will suffer. People do harm to one another. But part of the Christian worldview too is that there is justice that will await, so that people who are harmed will receive justice, and people who have executed that harm will also receive justice. And then the hope that Christians have is that there is a new creation that awaits, where there will be free will, but that those types of decisions will not be made, because human beings that enter into that new creation will have gone through a process of training and development where they become like Christ. They become perfect in terms of bearing God's image. That as they enter into the new creation, they will still have free will but not engage in that activity. So that would be the Christian explanation for why things are the way that they are.
Okay, thank you. Christopher Hitchens, when he was asked if he believes in free will, he said, "I don't think we have any choice."
All right, now,
Yes, sir.
I've got an undergraduate student at University of British Columbia. Geology is my major. I have a question. It's going to be related to Dr. Ray with his lithic rock proliferation and stone tools dating to about 40,000 to 30,000 years ago. And my general question is, how would you tie in climate change and the abundance of meat, which could basically allow people to do more thought and were not as non-nutritious into the development of thought?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that Homo habilis was consuming flesh, probably not hunting but scavenging, and there's a lot of calories that are available through meat consumption that you wouldn't get through a vegetarian diet. And apart from processing vegetable matter, you're not going to be able to extract the calories you need to support brain activity. But I don't know that just because the diet changed that necessarily then led to the evolution of larger brains. I don't think that dietary changes are going to cause large brains. It's just that, you need to have that type of diet to sustain it. So I'm not sure.
I can't stand on my question.
No, sorry, but you can ask him later. Okay. Did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think that it's a good point that I have an opinion about the need for meat in human beings, but the point generally that there is a feedback process for the evolutionary mechanism in which we require greater amounts of calories to sustain our intellectual development. And our intellectual development actually gives us the tools to get more calories. So there is this self-fulfilling nature to evolution that results in these explosive processes that we see in our past. And this is just sort of another example.
But just because you're consuming more meat in your diet doesn't mean that it's a given that the brain size would evolve to become larger.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it would be a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition, right?
I mean, what I mean to say is like a group of people that were able to consume more calories would be more successful in reproducing, and therefore, to the extent that brain size was advantageous, those would be the people whose brain sizes would continue to increase, and to the extent that they use that brain size to hunt. If you see what I mean? So it's not that it causes it, but it supplements it. It allows it to accelerate.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. But again, you wouldn't necessarily ever have to have, even if they were more successful, that leap to the next expansion in brain size. That's going to be essentially, in a sense, based on chance.
We're going to have
let that happen.
We're going to have a debate next week on nutrition. So. Yes, sir.
All righty. Okay, this is just a quick statement here. I probably won't change any minds. I lived with an atheist for 8 years, and I never could change hers. The thing is that, and this is totally to the one who practices the religion of atheism, the United States and Canada's whole system of laws, morals, and all of this good stuff that makes these two very free countries is built on the Judeo-Christian base. I would like to know if you can name one country that is built on an atheistic base, or even one city that's built on an atheistic base that has any of those freedoms.
Okay, thank you for your question. I appreciate that. As a devout atheist, I appreciate you recognizing it's just false, really, that the countries of Canada and the United States are founded on Judeo-Christianity or in any sort of way. The principles of Canadian and American governance are secular, fundamentally they're secular. It's sort of strange, actually, because England has an explicit tie to their church, and in so many ways, it's more secular in the practice of their governance than the United States is in practice, where the foundation of America is actually far more secular. But it's a very strange assertion to say that somehow we need God for having a civilized society, because your question that what countries are based on atheistic values. Well, the most secular countries in the world, like Japan, Sweden, Switzerland, Denmark, the Netherlands, all of these countries enjoy the highest rates of happiness, of health, the lowest crime rates. I'd be actually very glad to talk to you afterwards. I wish that I had put my email address actually on the PowerPoint. I guess I'm rambling now, but
you can give it over.
What's that? I'll give it over. Yeah. I guess that's my response.
Dr. Lee, did you have any kind of
the ideal behind the government of the United States is basically hinging on the notion that human beings are made with inalienable rights that are endowed by their Creator, and it goes back again to this idea of the image of God, which is a Judeo-Christian concept.
That concept is introduced in the Declaration of Independence. It's actually nowhere to be found in the foundational documents of the country itself. There's no indication of a creator or a deity, even in a deistic sense, in the Constitution or any of the governing documents. It's not. You're thinking of the Declaration of Independence, which is not.
But again, that's the foundation of the American government.
The Declaration of Independence was the communication to England that the United States would no longer be subservient to them. It's not the foundation. This is sort of going beyond the scope of our...
it is older now. Should we move on? Yes, sir.
So I'm going to propose to Dr. Rana here a sort of reverse passage figure. And that is to say that you stated how a non-believer could outperform a believer due to God giving us morals. And if this is the case, then what purpose then does belief in God serve if morals exist in us intrinsically?
The reason why I wanted to believe in God has nothing to do with whether or not you desire to live a moral life, but rather belief in God has to do with whether or not you desire to have a relation, at least from a Christian perspective, we desire to have a relationship with the Creator. And stemming out of that is then a desire to please the Creator by trying to behave in a way that would be in accordance with what the Creator desires. So the reason for being a Christian isn't because you want to be a better person. It has to do with whether or not you want to enter into what you perceive to be a relationship with the Creator. That's the reason for becoming a Christian, or the purpose of Christianity, if you want to frame it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to ask something clarifying about this image of God thing. So you're saying what makes human suffering bad is that we are created in the image of God. Now, non-human animals are not made in the image of God. So does that mean there is nothing morally wrong at all with animal suffering? Is it perfectly fine to, I don't know, torture a chimp just for enjoyment?
I don't think that is consistent with a Christian worldview, because again, from a Christian perspective, the idea is that human beings being made in God's image were then assigned the task of taking care of the planet and to care for life on the planet, that we have the right to utilize the life on the planet for the benefit of humanity, but nowhere does it say that we have the right to cause other creatures undue suffering. In fact, I think it's important, or a mandate, that we are to minimize the suffering of creatures on the planet. We're meant to minimize the destruction of the planet. So, as a Christian, I think the torture of animals or causing animals to suffer is an act that's immoral.
I just want to point out that in his response, which is a fair response in the framework that you're working in, it's actually very similar to how a secular person might respond. But in that response, there's nothing about the actual pain that the chimpanzee feels that makes torturing a chimpanzee immoral. I mean, that is a remarkable position to me, that it's not the pain of the chimpanzee or the suffering of the animal that makes it wrong, which is what I would say. But somehow the fact that God forbade it, or that God had a plan for us, and sort of like told us that this planet is we're the stewards of this planet, which I appreciate that interpretation of the Bible, because it renders the conclusion that it's immoral. But the reasoning seems to me very odd. I just wanted to.